Hello and welcome to the Functionally Enlightened Podcast with Dr. Sharon Surita. We interview well-respected medical and functional practitioners, as well as patients who have overcome disabling chronic conditions, such as dysautonomia, and reclaimed their health. These enlightened guests provide helpful tips on managing chronic pain and illnesses, using a combination of traditional and whole-body healing modalities. If you're interested in natural healing and quality of life improvement, you're in the right place. Thank you for listening to today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Functionally Enlightened Podcast. Today, we have another special guest by the name of Casey Hibbard, and she's the founder of Rebuilding My Health, which is a platform that shares wonderful, amazing recovery stories from people who reversed chronic conditions. And, they have tried multiple conventional medicine tactics, and that's failed to help. Casey resolved the symptoms and markers of autoimmunity and inflammatory arthritis through dietary changes, through gut healing protocols, and detoxification, including bouts of mold detoxification. With a background in journalism, she has since interviewed hundreds of individuals who've improved or reversed conditions like Hashimoto's or lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, Lyme, dysautonomia, migraines, even women's health challenges. And as we mentioned just briefly, mold illness, much more as well. She's the author of Overcoming Autoimmunity, which is real recoveries and what you can learn from them, distilling the most common and repeatable healing patterns across complex illnesses. Casey, we appreciate you being with us here today.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm excited and honored to be here to chat with you.
Very nice. So your personal story began where so many of our listeners are, and that's without answers, even in conventional medicine, where we expect to receive the help we need, the support, and the guidance. So what were the very first steps that truly moved the needle for you in reversing autoimmunity and arthritis?
Yeah, absolutely. I started having symptoms, just to give a little bit of background, started having symptoms in my early 40s. It was about a year or two after having a baby. Just things started kind of unraveling with digestive issues and arthritis in my hands and toes, kind of weakness and fatigue. I remember trying to walk up the stairs in my house, and I just felt heavy, like I was like dragging myself up the stairs. And then I was trying to keep up with a toddler at the time, and brain fog, and then also autoimmune markers that were going up. So whenever I was tested, those anti-nuclear antibodies would be increasing. So I knew things were getting worse, trending in the wrong direction. The worst, I guess, kind of scariest point was when I had blurry vision in one eye. And went to the optometrist, and she said, I can give you some drops to reduce the inflammation, but it's systemic inflammation. Something's going on in your body. This is not an eye problem. This is a whole body problem that your eye is also being affected. And so I think that was, certainly kind of a wake up call that there's inflammation. I need to get on top of this. And I was seeing a couple of ologists at the time, rheumatologist, gastroenterologist, and I got a little bit of help. I found out I had SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, in my gut. So that was something to work on. The rheumatologist was just kind of like, well, we don't really know what's going on, but we'll watch it. And I think for me, it was kind of like, I don't really want to just watch this. I want to get on top of it and start turning things around. So really kind of my journey into alternative or functional medicine practices was through the gut portal, I guess, because from knowing I had SIBO, I went to a gut health coach who found like 5 other gut things happening, and started applying some like herbal and more functional medicine approaches to healing my gut. I had H. pylori, Candida, parasites, just overall kind of too much bad bacteria, not enough good bacteria. So yeah, the gut portal was really my first approach, along with an anti-inflammatory diet. As you know, that really dramatically improved symptoms in the short term as I was working on my gut.
Now, Casey, some of our audience, they are pretty new to the functional health space. So learning about gut dysbiosis and some of the things you talked about, parasites, they think we're not going to be exposed to parasites in the US or any other country for that matter. But with that in mind, when you approached this GI health specialist and they gave you that first inclination to the imbalances that you had, what were your first thoughts? And then can you talk us through about how long of a process was it for you to start seeing some symptom resolution?
Sure. Yeah, so it started with the testing, and really the main test was a stool test called the GI map. And that was really critical to show everything I could see on paper, what it was I was dealing with. And then I had a health coach walk me through it and explain things. And then it was a layered approach because I had SIBO to deal with, and her approach was, we don't tackle everything at once, and we'll go in a specific order. And I think the order was SIBO and then H. pylori, and then H. pylori kind of at the same time. I was addressing Candida, overgrowth. And the parasite thing kind of came a little bit later. And really, I didn't do a specific test for parasites because the practitioner said, we all have parasites. I know that may sound surprising, as you said, because, if you haven't traveled abroad, then maybe you think you may not have been exposed to them, but they're pretty prevalent. Sushi, I think, is supposedly a major source of getting parasites here, but it's common. But I think some people may have worse cases of worse parasites than others. But anyway, I did a parasite protocol at one point and did feel better. So I know that was helpful along the way. But it took probably, with the gut healing, it probably took a couple of years because we were pretty methodical. I was feeling better along the way with each thing that we were doing, and my digestive symptoms were improving. My inflammation was definitely improving with all of the gut health stuff, along with a paleo diet. And it was kind of experimental. I was trying different forms of paleo to see what worked better for me and what things were personal triggers for me that may not be personal triggers for other people. So that combination of diet and gut healing got me probably 80 to 90% of the way. And I watched my autoimmune markers go down. So I'd be tested maybe every 6 months for the anti-nuclear antibodies, and those eventually went to negative, and my arthritis resolved. So yeah, it was pretty cool and empowering to see.
And in that sense, when your symptoms began to resolve, is that where your belief system started to shift and where you had other ideas in terms of the possibility of healing from chronic illness?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I will say, I've captured a lot of stories, but really the seed of hope for me started with finding those stories, other people mentioning in like private Facebook groups. I was in a Facebook group for SIBO, for just about any sort of health thing that you have, there seems to be a private Facebook group or a Reddit group or something. And so people would mention, oh, I had this and this is how I resolved it and I'm better now. And those gave me, they were educational as well as gave me the hope of what was possible, and really began kind of that mindset shift that I feel like has to happen if you're going to embark on this healing journey where you take control and navigating your health.
You just hit on the nail on the head with so many of the different aspects to healing. One of them being key is being in a community that's very supportive and muting those that might not be supportive and might just drive that flight or fight response or that fear that you'll never recover. So I know you have interviewed hundreds of individuals. Is there anything that surprised you most about how people are recovering?
I think honestly, what surprised me most is how universal the tactics are. Because I have done stories across lots of autoimmune stories, but also I've done 3 Alzheimer's stories and 1 or 2 Parkinson's and migraines and women's health challenges like endometriosis or PCOS, Lyme disease, mold. A lot of the stories have the same universal elements, the same things over and over again that people would mention that they applied to get better, which, yeah, just to me, it's been an education in that it does, that no matter what the diagnosis, all of these things are just going to be supportive of your body, just kind of general things to build your health.
Yeah, and that is the same methodology that we as FDNs use because there are certain pillars of health. And you really, when you're going through functional medicine or in our case, FDN, it's about peeling back those layers, identifying those hidden stressors on the body, and not necessarily worrying so much about getting the diagnoses. I myself was in that conventional health space, and I probably was labeled with 20 diagnoses and, prescribed many pharmaceuticals, surgical interventions I went through. There were so many things, and I wasn't getting better. It wasn't until I really dove into the functional health space that I learned to manage the chronic condition. Yes, conventional medicine is wonderful for those acute things or those major, the traffic accident or, heaven forbid, a gunshot or knife wounds or anything like that. Definitely, you wouldn't go into functional health space for that. But when it's chronic, there's a need to dive deeply into what each individual is having to overcome. And so there is functional lab testing, and you mentioned the GI map. That's one that is always recommended to do to check the gut health and those intestinal health markers. Were there any other functional labs that you've seen that you yourself have used or that you've seen being used across the multitude of people that you've interviewed?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the gut health testing is absolutely critical, and then a lot of the inflammatory markers and autoimmune markers. I know because I eventually moved to a functional medicine doctor after the gut health coach that I was working with, and she is regularly looking at inflammatory markers, the autoimmune markers, vitamin D, hormone levels. I can't remember all the things that she's looking at, but it's pretty extensive. As you mentioned early on, I did at one point find that I had mold illness or mold toxicity, and I'd gotten most of the way better, and really my autoimmune markers were mostly gone, but I was having some weird symptoms that just didn't make sense, like really irritated eyes, itchy, inflamed eyes all the time, and just kind of strange fatigue that ultimately I tied to mold. And so, but my functional medicine doctor, that was her instinct. Well, why don't we test for mold? Because she also has a mold history and story. So that was an important test for me to do, both my body and my home testing for mold.
Absolutely. So there are the plate tests that are available. There's the ERMI, there's the swabs and the dust where you actually have to go to multiple areas of your home, minus bathroom areas that can have regular mold species in there. Is that the kind of thing that you did for home testing?
Yes, I actually did I did a few different levels of mold testing, and this is kind of interesting. So we did like the air samples, and we had professionals come in and do it a couple of times, but really we were not ultimately, I don't feel like we were ultimately finding the source of the mold, because you may not be able to see it. So we actually had a mold dog come. Not sure if you've heard about the mold dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which was fascinating and super helpful because the dog would go around wall to wall and sit down when it sensed mold. And it was in our basement. It was sitting like the entire time. It was like this dog is just like every wall of our basement and then in our bedroom behind our headboard. And so ultimately, like it gave us some clues when we tore down the wall behind our headboard, there was mold in the wall there. Just never would have found that if we had not had, the dog to identify that.
Right.
So yeah, so that was actually pretty fascinating to discover, and then of course started a whole process of remediating and that kind of thing. You hope that it's visible and easier, but in our case it wasn't.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you probably had mold in one of the worst places you can have, because that's where you're supposed to be resting and repairing, and you are with that constant onslaught of mold right there in your bedroom.
Yeah.
So I know that we could dive into mold detoxification, but I know you kind of went over diet. You said how that might be the hardest change for most people to make. Why do you think food is the universal turning point across conditions?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've done a health success story, captured a health success story where food wasn't a piece of it. Because it's an input that you're giving your body at least 3 times a day, typically. And you can either give it something that's going to be inflammatory or something that's going to be, supporting your body and not inflaming it. And so I think, but we have these habits, and I just know from myself and from so many people I've spoken to, it is hard to rebuild those habits, especially at the beginning. But I think that I did it in a phased way. I first cut out dairy because I knew dairy was a huge trigger for me. And then someone suggested, one of my practitioners, you really need to try cutting gluten as well. And I did gluten testing. I was not celiac, but I have a gene for gluten sensitivity. So that definitely improved things, improved inflammation to cut gluten. And then from there, just the other things, sugar and grains for me. But I think what I see across all the different interviews that I do, it's some form of paleo usually that people are doing most often. And everybody's different. So experimenting a little bit can help. But yeah, there's autoimmune paleo, there's just kind of regular paleo. A lot of people did the Walls protocol, the specific carbohydrate diet, in general, kind of reducing those inflammatory grains, as you know.
Yeah, I think that's another important point to make. Exactly what you're saying is that different people will react to different diets differently. There is no one size fits all, but where someone is going from, say, a standard American diet and approaching any of the ones you just mentioned, the Walls protocol, even there's the GATS, which may not be the best for people with histamine sensitivities, but carnivore diets, for instance. In all of those diets, the main component is that you're bringing down the inflammatory burden of different foods. You're eliminating the processed foods, which is big. Along with that, the sugars, which causes that glucose dysregulation or blood sugar dysregulation. And I see that is often one of the major components. And people don't even realize it because not everyone's walking around with a CGM. They're not checking their blood sugar an hour, 2 hours after every meal. And so they don't realize that blood sugar dysregulation that's coming on from the processed foods could be a main driver of the inflammation in the body. So I agree with you 100% on the diet being one of the most critical pieces. And so you mentioned some of the areas where it might be more doable to kind of take a phased approach. In your case, you started with dairy. So it was reduction or elimination of it?
I think I started initially reducing it and then realized I just can't do any dairy. I was like, maybe I can do yogurt or something. And someone would say, oh, most people can do hard cheeses if they can't do other thing. And I just didn't find that I could really tolerate any dairy. So, yeah.
And did you find yourself in a very restrictive diet, or was it manageable and sustainable?
Yeah. So, I mean, it felt really restrictive, especially at the beginning, because, you keep taking things away, and that's kind of what it felt like. But I think, I don't know, for me, it was a little bit of mindset shift. I needed to build that habit of cooking differently and get rid of the cravings and that kind of thing, which kind of go away. Like if you stop having sugar, you're not craving sugar as much and such. So yeah, it's kind of building the habit, learning how to cook for me because I cooked, but not really in a very thoughtful way. It was we did a lot of those like frozen bags where you get the frozen bag of something and just dump it into a skillet, and I think there were probably a lot of not good things that we were consuming. So yeah, and I mean it is, I think, from a lot of people's perspective, a paleo diet is restrictive, but if you focus on what you can have, it's a pretty big list,
right?
Typically.
Not to mention the dramatic shift in how you feel over time. Like if you're just looking at a day to day, maybe not so much, but if you go back, if you journal along your healing journey, and you can see, wow, look at how incapacitated I may have been at this time, and look at everything that I can do now. It's worth it. It definitely is worth it. And then you can also share that, which is exactly what you do, and share that information, those resources, and let other people learn about the healing effects of food. But let's go beyond food now. We talked a little bit about gut healing, but let's talk about the toxin reduction, especially with mold and other like metals and, just multiple chemicals that we could be exposed to on a daily basis. What role did detoxification play in your recovery and in the recovery of those you've interviewed?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my own story, it was critical to like really getting my energy back. I mostly healed my gut, was feeling much better, didn't have arthritis, but I still didn't have the energy that I felt like I should have. And I did a toxin panel at one point beyond the mold testing, and the toxin panel turned out and if you do a pretty extensive one, it'll have like all of the, forever chemicals and just all of the bad stuff that we hear about, in our environment. And so that would really gave me like a stark picture of what I needed to focus on. So I really did a focused detox protocol for a little while, taking some binders, doing sauna, that sort of thing, along with addressing mold. But then at the same time, I was also trying to clean up my environment besides just cleaning up my body, and like getting air filters and making sure that we were drinking the cleanest water that we could, changing detergents and personal care products. I always knew that I was sensitive to things like fragrance. And so, we'd gotten rid of that stuff, but also just paying attention and reading labels to get rid of, more of the chemicals that were in like shampoo and all that sort of thing. So, so that definitely got me, I feel like, to the next level, all of that, and which, probably took another year or two to work through.
Yeah. And I love that you capitalized on removing the toxin exposure. That's something that people are like, no, I need to do a 3-day cleanse. And, that's where I need to focus. I'm going to do this juice cleanse, or I'm going to just do raw veggies or something like that. And they consider that detox, along with this like supplementation protocol that they might have picked up from social media or from some type of influencer. So right. I really love that your primary location focus on was the environment and what you're exposed to. We're breathing 20,000 times plus a day. Our hearts are pumping blood. We're drinking so much water. We should be, 2 liters a day or something like that. And so making sure that water is from the cleanest source possible, which is what you just mentioned. Air quality, it's so important. With mold specifically, we want to make sure that humidity is at the ideal range. So nothing above 65% for sure, but also if we go too dry, that could provoke other respiratory symptoms. So there's that beautiful median, that balance that we're looking for in the environment so that we can be balanced in our bodies. And I think that that's a trend that you're seeing in yourself and in all of the people that you interviewed. There were a couple of things also that you mentioned when healing was not linear. You said it took you some time. So many in our community are also they get stuck in the cycle of flares, and that could be from, before going through functional health and in the conventional space, there was just a cycle of flares. And even with some practitioners, they're not really targeting the whole body. They're still attacking a symptom, and that doesn't get them anywhere. What helped people in your community move from those constant reactions to more of a stability frame point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question, Sharon. I think having these healthy habits, for sure, finding and landing on these healthy habits that not just get you better, but are going to keep you living optimally. Someone will say to me, "Oh, well, you healed your gut, great. Like, why can't you eat this thing now?" And it's kind of like, well, this is what worked for me and getting me better. I'm gonna stick with what is working. And so I think that that's really what I see is kind of that consistency. And yes, you have to change your life in some ways to support these healthy habits, to be continuously, eating well and really practicing the self-care that you need to. So one thing we haven't talked about yet that I've heard so much is stress management, because so many people I've spoken with, they start having symptoms or get ill after a major stressful event, a death in the family or divorce, or they've been in a really stressful job. In my case, it was having a baby, which is a happy thing. However, it is a big stressor on the body. And so many of the women I've spoken with, their symptoms started pretty soon after becoming moms.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's really, I think about building those healthy habits and keeping them for the long haul.
Yeah, and thank you again, Casey, for bringing that up, the stress management piece that is often pushed to the side. People don't realize the amount of stress they're under, especially just with the day-to-day routine, the hustle and bustle. If you're a mom, you have, that's a 24-hour job. Even when you're not with the child, if the child is at school, you're constantly worried about that child. And then with the workforce, we have that hustle culture. If you're not productive all the time, then you're doing something wrong. And it goes along the line of the students, you have to be in classes, and then you have all of this homework to do. And then there's athletics if you're involved in athletics, and it's just go, go, go with no time to stop and reflect. And that's one of the biggest things for me. Type A personality, many of our listeners probably can relate to that, where there's always this bar that you're trying to work to meet. And you don't give yourself the time to do those self-care practices. You mentioned a couple of them during your journey, like infrared sauna or sauna in general, red light therapy. And, some people do massage therapy or physical therapy. And these things take time away from our schedule. And we don't even work on our schedules to build that in as if it was an appointment that we need to keep. And that really is something that needs to change, hopefully sooner than later, because that's another piece that can bring on chronic illness, like not taking care of self. And so if someone could only focus on a few foundational changes and just kind of dig into your experience with this, which ones would be the ones you would recommend most, or which ones have you seen be more successful consistently?
Mm-hmm. Right, definitely. I mean, I would say probably boil it down to 5, and we've talked about, I think, most of them, but just to like really hone in on them. First of all, mindset. is critical. And I know you've probably seen this as well, where your mindset has to be focused on the positive and not the negative of, oh, I Googled my diagnosis and this is what I'm seeing. And so this is the story I'm projecting of what my life is going to be like, how things are going to unfold. So kind of stepping back and resetting that, maybe finding some success stories of other people who had something similar, and like kind of getting that mindset into, I think I can do this. I have some control and I'm going to take some steps forward to support my health. So mindset is huge. The anti-inflammatory diet really is very universal across whether it's Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or autoimmunity, etc. Any inflammation, that's huge. The gut healing for sure. I interviewed a woman who she cleared up her SIBO and her arthritis went away. Similar to me, her rheumatoid arthritis went away when she healed her gut, which is not something that we normally would hear from a conventional rheumatologist. Mm-hmm. Oh, you need to go heal your gut to get rid of the pain in your hands. So, just kind of understanding that stress management, addressing trauma, and then the fifth one would be the detox practices as well. Mm-hmm. I would say.
Yeah. And with the conventional health space and functional, now we're looking across the spectrum. What do you think is missed when we use the term chronic?
Yeah, chronic, it's kind of a triggering word for me because it implies something that you may never get rid of, or that's going to always be with you, or that's unfixable. And so many of these conditions, like autoimmunity or especially Alzheimer's and et cetera, are things when people get that diagnosis, they expect to have that forever. And so I think that in my personal experience, and then from interviewing so many other people, it's doesn't have to be one direction. What I've seen is it's like a spectrum you can slide on. You can, kind of like have flares and get worse, or you can progressively get better and go down on that spectrum. So hope people can believe and understand that can be possible.
Mm-hmm. Again, going back to that mindset shift where, we could change the word from chronic illness to maybe chronic health, and it gives it a total different spin. Like we may be ill, but we're working towards that health. And with resources such as the ones that you have provided, can you talk to us a little bit about the book? Because I think that's exactly what people that are in the pits really needs to focus on, these kinds of stories that can be uplifting.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. The book is focused on autoimmune success stories, and it's across, I think, 19 different autoimmune conditions. There's MS, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, Graves' disease, and then some of the digestive ones, colitis, Crohn's, et cetera. And then some additional ones. Some people had 5 or 6 autoimmune diagnoses because and they would say jokingly, oh, I was collecting autoimmune diagnoses. And, you must see this as well. But they would apply some of these universal practices that we've talked about today, and all of them would be addressed. So it's not like you're just targeting lupus or MS or whatever. By doing these things that are going to support your body, they target all of the conditions and symptoms.
Because of the practices that people bring in, they are hitting on hormones, they're hitting on immune, digestion, detoxification, even energy and mitochondrial function too. That nervous system balance is a critical piece. It's not to be tacked on in the end, but sometimes that nervous system, we need to do the work to allow ourselves to open up, to receive everything else, to be able to work on all of those other systems. So I do appreciate all the effort that you've done to bring this to light and to really target those conditions that people are thinking they're going to deteriorate more and more. The ones that you mentioned, like Parkinson's and MS, they just have that trajectory planned out. But we can see with stories like yours and the ones that you share that it doesn't have to be that way, and people can regain function. I think you have a resource that you're open to sharing with our audience. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I kind of summarized all of the major steps or most common steps that people took across all the different autoimmune conditions in my book. And I will say, though, like I've said, the tactics are pretty universal. So even if you don't have an autoimmune condition or diagnosis, then it could be helpful for you because they are very supportive in general of healing and tend to be the same things that I've heard other folks doing beyond autoimmunity.
I feel like we need to collaborate more on this piece because I have been doing a study, it's a community survey, going just into people who have received implants, most of them hernia mesh, some with breast implants, it could be joint replacements, even dental implants, but they've responded. And some of the questions we talked about were like, what were the symptoms, of course, what was the time of onset, but also what were the modalities that you've tried and that were not successful versus which ones were at the top of the list. And so there's like strange ones that you wouldn't consider ordinarily, and some that could be pricey, like hyperbaric oxygen chamber. Nobody can do that on a daily basis, right? But there's also like medical marijuana that some people have found a lot of success with. And so these are just modalities that would help manage, but going back to healing the terrain with the diet and with detoxing on a daily basis. It's not just a one-time thing. I think that your story shows us that it is a lifelong journey. And so we just have to continuously take steps based on where we are at that point in time. There could be times when we're free and clear of a lot of the stressors that we probably had a decade ago. And so it might be easier to lighten the burden. And then on the converse side, it could be a lot of stress and it takes a toll on us. So I just want to go back to your primary areas. We talked about the food. So the 5 things that you mentioned that people can take on, but also, is there something that made it more doable for you to have success? Is there something that really kind of you were able to integrate into your lifestyle and it's still a piece of what you do today?
Yeah. I mean, everything is still with me pretty much that I've done along the way. I'm really, the diet stuff, the sauna, the self-care. I realized that I needed to probably work less and avoid stressful work situations because that was sort of yes, hard on my nervous system, hard on my adrenals, etc. So really like the self-care practices and the diet, it feels like I'm taking care of myself. And that just feels good. And it feels like something I can control, because when you have an illness, that like feeling like you don't have control, is hard and disempowering. So if I can make a decision between this meal and the next meal, then I'm going to like eat better and nourish my body, then it's empowering.
Absolutely. So I appreciate your time, Casey. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing about your resources. Can you let our audience know how they can learn a little bit more about you or get access to some of the things you've provided?
Yeah, absolutely. So my online magazine is at rebuildingmyhealth.com. And I'm also rebuilding my health on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. The book is on Amazon, and would love to hear from folks if somebody heard this episode. And I'm also always looking for inspiring health success stories. So if someone out there has one to share, I'd love to possibly share it in the magazine.
Awesome. So I will make sure to get that information in our show notes. Thank you so much again for spending this time with us today and for sharing again your story and the powerful patterns that you've uncovered through your interviews with people. conversations like this really remind us that healing is rarely a single intervention. It's layered. We're going to keep repeating that. It is a layered approach. It's personalized, and it really is deeply connected to how we nourish, how we support, and how we listen to ourselves over time.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. I really appreciate the chance to chat.
All right. So if today's episode resonated with you, be sure to share it with someone in your healing circle. Subscribe so you don't miss upcoming conversations, and continue exploring resources that help you take each step forward. As always, thank you for being a part of our Functionally Enlightened community, and we look forward to meeting you here again. Take care.